Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today, we're jumping into some bad bosses. Before we start, I'm not going to ask you to subscribe, but I do want to ask you to comment down below something from the story, or even insult me if you want to, I don't care. But we don't get very many comments on the videos here at KCC, and it leaves me with not a whole lot to do in the evening, because I have no friends. So please, leave some comments so I can feel like I'm loved. You know you want to, and you might even get some cookies out of it. This story comes to us from RC Cola Machine, a horrible boss with even worse management skills. Let's jump right in. Allow me to set the scene. I am a worker for a company whose name I will leave out for obvious reasons. I have a manager who in this story I will refer to as Jay. Jay has a tendency to say things that legally he is not supposed to say. He has an assistant who I will call Sarah. After much confusion on if our specific assigned post would be open for Christmas Eve, we finally received a call from Sarah stating that our post will be closed, and that she hopes we enjoy our holiday and day off. Sarah is a hard-working and sweet person, while Jay is a person only worried about their own comfort. I have dinner plans with my mother at 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and a few minutes after being told that we have it off, Sarah calls me back personally to say that sadly I was assigned a different post from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Christmas Eve. No problem, a little extra pay, and I'd still have 4 hours to get everything ready. This is where Jay gets involved. Jay then corrects Sarah and says that the shift is 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. But since I already accepted, I can't back out. To keep things simple, my contract with the company does not force me to work overtime, nor does it force me to accept scheduling changes if it inconveniences plans I had prior to the schedule change. So I then say to Sarah, I'm sorry, but that shift doesn't work for me. I have dinner plans with my mother. 6 to 2 is fine, but 2 to 10 is the worst possible schedule. Okay, OP, I'll talk to Jay about this. Would you mind waiting a second? Not at all, that's fine. So I wait only to overhear Jay's words to Sarah. That effer doesn't have plans. Tell him he's being reassigned and that I don't want to hear any of his BS complaints. Remember, I overheard this, and when Sarah comes back to explain, I tell her that I overheard him and that I'd like to speak to HR if she wouldn't mind. Side note, office phone calls are always recorded. And seeing as how Jay is new to our district, he didn't actually know about this. Sarah says that HR isn't in the building and that I would need to ask Jay directly for their personal phone number. I ask Jay for HR's personal phone number and he responds in the only way you'd expect someone of his likeliness to respond. Go ahead and complain. They're not going to do anything about it. This is the part of the story where I mentioned that Jay is not a regional manager. His regional manager, who I will call Bethany, is an absolute tough-as-nails woman who doesn't allow her employees to be discriminated against. I had mentioned this to Bethany as soon as it happened, and Bethany simply responds with, "Don't worry, I'll make sure that this gets resolved." Fast forward to now, about 8 hours later, and Jay calls me and very obviously choking back his pride says, "Hey, I'm sorry for the way I acted, and I would like to tell you that I found coverage for that post, so you may have your day off like originally stated. I'm sorry for any inconveniences, and if you were insulted in any way, I hope you enjoy your holidays." Bethany then calls me to tell me that she will be auditing Jay and monitoring him to make sure that he cannot retaliate against me, and that currently he'd be suspended without pay because they heard his words over the recorded phone call. Sometimes awful bosses get what they deserve, and while this may be seen as revenge, I just wanted the day off to take my mother out. The suspended without pay was not my intentions at all. Yeah, looking at this one, the conversation that Jay had with his assistant Sarah was one of those conversations you'd have in an office behind closed doors where you know you're not being recorded. Although you shouldn't be saying things like that about your employees in the first place, you definitely don't say things like that on the phone. I don't know, Jay seems like one of those people that has the big fish in a small pond kind of attitude, where they think that their crap doesn't stink, and because they're a manager, they're above everybody else. It's nice to see when somebody like this gets taken down a peg by the people above them. This story comes to us from Corianne0226. My boss tried to fire someone via mail and it backfired. Let's jump right in. My first full-time job was a horrible experience. I worked as an admin for a small private company that was horribly mismanaged. There were a lot of problems, but one of the biggest and most relevant to this story was that the owner was greedy. So if someone quit or was fired, rather than hiring someone to replace them, he'd just pass that person's responsibilities off onto someone else and pocket the money he would have paid the new employee. One Friday, our finance and HR manager, we'll call her Kathy, was out sick. My boss, we'll call her Patty, asked me to go into Kathy's office and grab a few HR files, including Kathy's. Towards the end of the day, Patty called me into her office and handed me Kathy's HR file and a piece of paper. She told me to type up what was written on the paper on our letterhead and then send it out to Kathy. She said to get her address from her file, send the letter via FedEx overnight, select Saturday delivery, and request a signature upon delivery. Figuring it was something urgent and finance related, I didn't question it. It was only once I started typing it up that I realized that it was a letter firing Kathy. I was horrified that they would take such a cowardly way to fire an executive who had worked for the company for 10 years. But at that point, I wasn't surprised. I did as I was told and dropped the envelope in the FedEx box outside the office on my way out. The following Monday, I had barely sat my things down when Patty came storming into my office and slammed the door behind her. "Did you send out that letter to Kathy like I told you to do on Friday?" "Yes." "Are you 100% certain?" "Yes, I sent it overnight, Saturday delivery, signature required." "And you made sure that you put it in the box before they pick it up for the day?" "Yes, I put it in the box when I left at 5:30, and they don't pick up till 7:30. "Well, obviously you did something wrong because she's here, and she doesn't seem to have any idea that she shouldn't be. You've made things very awkward for me," and she stormed out. A few minutes later, I see Kathy walk past my office into Patty's office and close the door. I logged onto our corporate FedEx account and checked the tracking log for the letter. The note said that delivery was attempted Saturday morning, but was rejected because Kathy no longer lived at the address. It turns out Kathy had moved a while back, but had been so overwhelmed with everything else that had been piled on her that she didn't think that updating her own address in her HR file was a huge priority. What a story. OP, keep an eye outside your house cause I think you might be getting a visit from the FedEx guy soon. Let's be completely honest here though, you work for an absolute effing coward. It completely reminds me of a boss I once had named Rick that a lot of people on my channel have heard about already. The guy was the epitome of a big fish in a little pond because if you said or thought anything that went against him, he would drag you into his office, yell at you that he was the boss, and you do what he says. Because he knew that you couldn't say anything back because you still needed the job. But this is the same kind of guy that would want to have the district manager in the store when he was letting an employee go. Because at that point he knew that there could be backlash and he wanted nothing to do with that because Rick was a pussy. Screw you, Rick. This story comes to us from a deleted account. I got my boss arrested and bankrupted and tore down the store. Let's jump right in. This happened about 5 years ago in a small town. I do mean that it was a small town. There was a bar, a gas station, a post office, the grocery store, and a stop sign. We didn't even get enough traffic for a light. I worked at that grocery store in the deli and I hated it. The owner was a complete monster and we butted heads constantly. Luckily, I worked under the deli manager who wasn't a complete jerk. The owner would deny time off and make you work off vacation time before you took it. So if you wanted to take 20 hours of vacation time, you had to find a way to work those 20 hours before you left, or it was unapproved, and he could schedule you during that time. On the fateful day that started the drama, the deli manager was out and I was the only person working in that department. I was also very, very sick. I'd been out already for 2 days, and the owner informed me that if I didn't come in, I would be fired. So I dragged myself to work and set about slicing meat and cheese, while taking breaks to throw up anything, including bile and water I might have in my stomach. I kept getting worse and worse and could barely see, but the owner refused to put me in a different department or let me go home. I'm not sure when it happened, since the rest of this story is secondhand and just a blur to me. I was found unconscious on the deli floor by a customer who called 911. The owner tried to block the EMTs from reaching the deli while telling them there was no need for them. I was loaded onto the stretcher and put into the back of the ambulance only for the owner to block them in. He wanted me to clock out before being taken to the hospital. Mr. Jerkface owner ended up getting arrested, and I got to spend 4 days in the hospital with norovirus. His actions led to health inspectors coming in who found a whole bunch of things wrong. He was storing frozen meat on the freezer floor next to cleaning supplies. The store got shut down and later demolished. The employees, myself included, had to sue him to get our final paychecks. He decided that it was our lack of responsibility that led to this, and therefore we should pay the massive fines. I was one of the oldest employees there at 20 years old. Most were high school kids. By the end of the year, the store was torn down and the owner bankrupt and in jail. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called the Fluff Panda. It says, "I don't understand how he thought you were able to clock out. What was going through his head?" OP responded and said, "He thought that if I was off the clock when I was taken to the hospital, that it wouldn't be considered a workman's comp thing." Oh, okay, well that's definitely not a manager that made it into that position by knowing what they were doing. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. If somebody's unconscious, number one, they can't punch out, but number two, they became unconscious while on the clock. It doesn't matter if they punch out afterwards or not. They had their injury on the clock, and workman's comp is there just for that reason. I think OP needs to take this one a little bit further and have a chat with an employment lawyer though, because this boss took things way too far. They made you work and put you into a really bad situation where you hurt yourself, and that's just not cool. This story comes to us from Casey Quayle, Toxic Boss. Let's jump right in. So I work in my family business. The foreman of our shop is a guy who has been there for 5 years. We will call him Bob. He became the foreman because him and the former foreman, we will call Bill, got into an argument. Well, my parents decided to side with Bob and fired Bill. Well, this guy who my parents thought was the right choice at the time is now a butthole. I'll explain. Today, he wanted the new guy to sweep up an area of the shop. So what does he do? He complains to one of the other coworkers, Frank. He complained about it all day. Frank got so frustrated, he projected it on me and the new guy. So me being one of the family members in the business, I decided to get to the bottom of this and realized that it was basically a game of telephone. Bob wanted the new guy to sweep up the area, but told his coworker instead of going straight to the new guy and asking him. The new guy never got told by anyone what he was supposed to do, so he never did it. This literally caused everyone to turn on each other. So I went up to Frank and asked him what the problem was. I said, if you have a problem with the other guy, then keep me out of it. And if you have a problem with me, then tell me. He tells me that it has nothing to do with me, and so he apologizes. Anyway, so long story short, it was a game of telephone basically because of a lack of communication by the foreman. The foreman is very negative, never takes ownership of anything, always blames it on someone else. He talks crap about you behind your back, but then when he talks to you, it's like you are best friends. He is completely fake and very passive aggressive, never goes directly to anyone, and basically just gets mad at everyone all the time. To say the least, he is a very bad leader. He also texts all day long. Only reason we keep him is because he is the most experienced and knows how to do everything in the shop. With the equipment, he is very valuable, but is very toxic when it comes to his lack of leadership and his personality. What I found was best for my mental health was to not be fake with him. I lost total respect for him. I don't smile at him. I keep things very professional. I don't make things difficult. I still work with him and try to communicate with him, but I also try to avoid talking to him as much as possible, which has also been very good for my mental health. So I guess my question is, has anyone else dealt with a person like this? And what have you done to deal with it? Obviously, there is almost always the option to find a new job, but in the meantime, how do you handle it? Any tips? OP, your parents run this business, right? Have a talk with them. Open communication about what's going on is going to be a really good start to figuring out what to do here. Then you put the onus on your parents to figure out what they need to do to make the company run better. And if that means getting rid of Bob and sucking up to Bill, then that's the way it needs to go. I strongly believe that a family business should have communication between the family that runs it. This story comes to us from Chubby Bunny Bean. Why I don't bring sweets anymore. Let's jump right in. This man, oh my gosh, this man. I have too many stories to count. He is so clueless and selfish, it brings new meaning to the words. For a long time, I'm talking years, usually on a weekly or at the least every other week, I'd always bring in a big box of sweets, usually pastries, for everyone. The boss, along with all of his other charming qualities, was also very lazy and very impatient. So if he was the first one to the box, he'd usually just rip the ever-loving crap out of it instead of just, opening the box. But this one takes the cake, pun intended, and it ended me bringing desserts and ruining it for everyone. One day, I bring in a box of 15 Cinnabons. That's about 2 for everyone, small business, not a lot of employees. I hadn't had breakfast that day, so a little more after an hour later, I decide to grab myself one. The entire box is missing. What? Is it in the trash? No. Wait a second, where is boss? I asked the only other person working that day if boss is gone, and she confirmed he straight up walked out of the store with the box in hand. Furious, I call his wife, who is usually at home, and demand she tell him to turn around the second he walks through the door and bring it back. Her response is to just giggle and say something like, "Oh, he never thinks." About 15 minutes later, he comes back into the store with the box. I look inside, 8 are gone. That means this selfish bastard tried to take the entire box, and when he got caught, took over half for himself. I said clearly, I hope you really like those 8 cinnamon buns, because I'm never bringing anything in again. That was about 2 years ago. I've never brought in anything for the office again. I'm not sure if this is really revenge against the boss, as it is taking away tasty treats from all of your coworkers. That kinda sucks for them. I would have talked to the coworkers, gotten a group of them together who could maybe bring things in on different days, but when they do, leave them on their desk, or at least on someone else's desk if they go for a break, so that the boss can't just walk up and help themselves. Is there a subreddit out there for entitled bosses? Because whatever made him think that he was entitled to take those, well, there should be a whole subreddit for that, because I know there's more stories about bosses out there that do the same kinds of things, and I love to hear them. Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Because he knew at that point that the employee wouldn't need the job anymore because they were being fired, but there might be bashlack. What the fuck is bashlack?